And
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Clean Jobs Coalition Lunch and Learn today. I'm really excited to have John Delurey. John Delurey is the Senior Regional Director at Vote Solar. He's also, among many other things, on the IEC Board of Directors and has been a leader in the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And we're really excited about his talk today, which is going to be on inclusive financing and grant opportunities. This is going to be recorded for a later time, so if you have any questions, you can refer to it later. I'm not going to be on for the whole time, but Paloma Campillo and Sam Bauer from our staff will be on. If you have any technical considerations, please message them. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, and John can answer it as he'd like. So thanks again for joining us as part of these Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition Lunch and Learns. And I think our next one is in April. Let me just do a quick when it is. So the next one is about just transition for communities and workers on April 13th at noon with folks from Prairie Rivers Network and IEC talking about just transition. So again, thanks for joining us, and we'll record this for later and put any questions in the chat. So thanks so much. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Jen. Quick virtual round of applause and your words of encouragement for Jen too, who's off to fight at the Capitol for coal ash and to get this bill over the finish line. So good luck, Jen. All right, I'm gonna share my screen and we'll dive right in to some of the inclusive financing functions in CEJA. Can you all see that okay? Let's see.
looks good.
Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with IEC and on this exciting topic. So I'll probably go through the slides, but please do add your thoughts or suggestions in the chat. And I also encourage, if there are specific topics that you want to drill in more, in advance or as we go, please feel free to just flag that as we go in the chat. And that can be a good cue for me to just dig down to that next level of detail. I suspect there's a lot of different people on the call who have different levels of expertise and awareness of what's in CEJA and how some of these different pieces work. So I'm happy to tailor it to the audience to whatever extent makes sense. So feel free to just nudge me in one direction or the other in the chat. So Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was 956 pages long and touched almost every component of the clean energy economy. And I think that oftentimes even folks who are watching and tracking these things closely forget how many tools we as advocates, as consumers, as entrepreneurs now have to create the clean energy economy and to do so in an equitable and inclusive way. Before I sink my teeth into that, wanted to just give a quick download on who Vote Solar is and what my role is with the organization. So we are about 40 people. We're a national organization, but we exclusively really focus on state level solar and climate justice issues. We tend to do both regulatory and legislative campaigns. So regulatory is, working on things like the Illinois Commerce Commission, working with the bureaucrats and the technical staff that are trying to implement legislation. And we work like we did with the Clean Jobs Coalition to try to brainstorm and draft and advocate for legislation itself. So we have a Midwest team. I help lead that team. And we are not just in Illinois, we're looking at Michigan and Minnesota as well. And sometimes it helps to kind of cross-pollinate good ideas. And there's plenty to choose from in CEJA. So today we'll focus in on inclusive financing and grant opportunities. I broadened the description a little bit to talk not just about grants, but about inclusive financing. So we're going to cover a few different topics that live in different parts of the state and serve very different functions but it's all in the spirit of making capital and funding more accessible. Here's my acronym cheat sheet. I have a bad habit of using acronyms. And so I just wanted to put this up real quick. That said, if you do hear me use some acronyms and it helps to unpack those a little bit, please don't hesitate to say something in the chat. But these are some common acronyms that you hear in this energy and climate policy work in Illinois. Before I talk about the programs, I wanted to talk about the problem. We have a lot of work to do to get to where we need to be for climate mitigation, for pollution reduction, for equitable growth. And so this is just looking at sort of the customer focus, right? We have a lot of residential customers who have leaky, unweatherized buildings that aren't safe or warm or comfortable, and certainly aren't affordable. And so there's a lot of work needed just to change our housing stock and get to this place where we need to be. This chart shows where we must go, which is, dramatically increasing the pace of energy efficiency and weatherization work in order to get to our climate goals in time. And this shows historically what has been deployed in terms of funding. And this is all national, but you can see where, after the recession, the Recovery Act did unlock more funding than we'd ever seen, but it still was just the drop in the bucket of what's truly needed to transform our economy and to make this possible. And without some additional capital or funding or support, none of this is possible. Then on the other side of this inclusive financing equation, you have BIPOC and disadvantaged contractors that are consistently locked out from the capital that's needed to take their great ideas and make them real. So these are a few headlines. I don't know if this will come as a surprise to anybody on this call, but there is tremendous disparity in lending, in capital and access to financing. And so these are just a few key takeaways of how those disparities show themselves and how impacted BIPOC businesses and entrepreneurs are. And I won't go through each and every one of these, but I shared these two slides to level set a little bit about what motivated the Clean Jobs Coalition and our allies to pursue these different inclusive financing mechanisms. There's tremendous need, both from the customer perspective and the contractor and entrepreneur perspective, to unlock new capital. So one of the ideas that was sort of born and incubated in the Clean Jobs Coalition and among some of our partners and allies is the notion of creating a new not-for-profit entity that could unlock new capital for disadvantaged customers and contractors. And so this is designed to be an inclusive financing tool that will develop its own financing products to address inequities and disparities and gaps wherever they emerge. So this did end up in CEJA. It is a new not-for-profit that was just created a few months ago to begin brainstorming where those gaps are. It receives $1 million per year from the state, which is a lot of money. It's not quite enough to do everything that this will need to do to unlock capital and to directly deploy capital, but it's enough to show that this is a serious player in pursuit of these options. It's also enough to cover overhead and some salaries and to provide that general support that this type of green bank entity will need. So I think I've covered a little bit of this, but this is added to CEJA because renewables themselves, like clean energy solutions, are sometimes hard to finance. They're newer, they're inaccurately viewed as a little bit riskier. And so there's just a lack of availability of funding and financing in general for renewable energy technology. You layer on those disparities that I touched on in one of those earlier slides, and you have BIPOC businesses and communities that are systemically excluded from these opportunities and from this capital. And this dives in a little bit deeper to those details about some of the disparities that we still see. This is about workforce, but we believe there to be similar disparities for ownership of clean energy companies. And there's this role to be mindful and to direct policy to tackle some of these disparities as they go, to not just allow the natural flow towards existing sources of wealth and prosperity, but to reroute some of that. So this is the mission. I wrote here about offering multiple financial products, but ultimately it will be up to the board of directors and their executive director to determine what those products are. But this is what we believe, is in the realm of possibility for the services that this new nonprofit green bank will offer. So, these are some potential notions, right? Some no or low cost loans for BIPOC contractors. On-bill repayment we'll actually touch on a little bit later in the presentation. But even potentially like owning their own financing products like leases for rooftop solar or power purchase agreements for low income and EJ communities or customers in those communities. This is the board of directors that will ultimately run the Jobs and Justice Fund. Again, it's a nonprofit that was just created through this statute, or at least kickstarted. And the first board will be appointed by the governor. There are parameters about who the governor can hire or appoint for this position. But ultimately, it will be on the governor's plate to figure out who should populate this first board. And then the board will adopt bylaws and ultimately select the executive director. One quick flag here is that while we, as the Clean Jobs Coalition, or as the Inclusive Financing Committee within the Clean Jobs Coalition, while we are not determining who populates these nominations and plays a role in the Jobs and Justice Fund, we are soliciting recommendations, and we hope to pass along those recommendations to Governor Pritzker and his team. And so if you do know somebody, or if you are somebody who would be interested in supporting this, especially if you represent one of these sort of criteria that are listed here, but either way, please reach out, just shoot me an email at john@votesolar.org, and would love to try to plug you into that ongoing conversation. So this, as I mentioned, right, there's need for disadvantaged customers, there's need for disadvantaged entrepreneurs and contractors, and this can hypothetically do both. So it's designed to have some customer-facing products and some direct financing for projects themselves, and to support contractors and businesses and entities. Oh, and thanks, Ryan, for adding that in the chat. Yep, please feel free to use that form to complete the nomination form. So this is another entity in CEJA, completely separate from the Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund. It's called the Climate Bank, and it's within the Illinois Finance Authority, which is an existing infrastructure bank that has existed for many years and is now being changed slightly in recognition of the climate crisis and the need to do something about it. So in general, I would say that the Climate Bank appears, the language in CEJA appears to fine tune it to support larger projects, sort of like infrastructure scale projects that are climate resilient. And it's not just clean energy. It is also perhaps stormwater management, other issues that will likely intensify with the climate crisis. It does have an equity focus, but I would say it's slightly less tailored to disadvantaged customers or contractors. And there isn't specific funding allocated, but because it is part of the state, because it's a state-based entity, they will have different and perhaps more accessible tools for raising funds and for deploying capital. I wanted to flag this as a case study. Connecticut is one of the few states in the country, perhaps the only state, that has reached some degree of parity in terms of lower income customers being just as likely to go solar as higher income customers. So essentially, if you were to split the population in two, those who are under 100% of area median income and those who are above 100% area median income. A new solar customer, it's a 50-50 shot whether they're above or below that income threshold. And that's in large part thanks to the hard work that these financing entities have done in Connecticut. So Connecticut Green Bank is the oldest state-based green bank. They've been around for a long time, since July 2011. But they realized in 2018 that as a larger, perhaps slightly slower state-based entity, there were things that they couldn't quite do, especially in pursuit of equitable outcomes. So they sort of spun out this new nonprofit green bank called Inclusive Prosperity Capital. And this fund is more specifically targeted towards low and moderate income populations. And I think this will paint a decent picture for how I believe these two entities in Illinois created in CEJA will function. So Connecticut Green Bank will be more similar to the Climate Bank, which is in state government. It's in the Illinois Finance Authority. And Inclusive Prosperity Capital will function more like the Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund. Don't quote me on that. It's too early to know exactly how these two entities will unfold, but this is sort of what I hope will happen, is this type of synergy between the two. So this is the third of 4 entities that we're going to talk about. This is the Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program, and is introducing a whole new implementing agency into the conversation here. So this grant program will actually live at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and it's designed to unleash direct grant capital through 2 different channels. One is for disadvantaged contractors. The other is for communities that want to pursue community-owned community solar. So fairly different uses of the funding, but it's the same sort of pool of money in this Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program. So it's a substantial amount of capital. It's $34 million per year from the state. We're not sure exactly when the first tranche of funding will be released. It's largely up to the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, but we anticipate it to be within the next year. And so we could start to see some applications for this funding relatively soon. Most of the capital, most of that 34 million, is for equity eligible contractors, which is like CEJA speak for disadvantaged contractors. It'll be for them to just use for seed capital and pre-development funding. So for solar projects and similar projects like that, you tend to need a lot of money up front. And then the value of those projects is over time. And so that's why capital and financing is so important to clean energy, because you need that money immediately, and then you'll start to get different things as we go. So they might start to get the federal tax credit within a year or a few years. They will be able to start claiming some depreciation of that asset. And in Illinois, they would be able to get a renewable energy credit or a REC. But that doesn't necessarily happen immediately. It's something that also takes some time to come back. So this is designed to support those contractors ahead of project development for all of the things that they would need to spend money on to get that project through. Labor, right? Software to determine how productive the solar system is, consultants as necessary to be able to figure out how to pursue this project and how to make it all pencil out. So that's that equity eligible contractor slice of this funding. The other slice, which is up to 25%, is to support communities that would like to explore community-owned community solar. So by way of background, this is a whole new program that was created through CEJA. And if we haven't covered it in one of these lunch and learn sessions, we may want to put that on the agenda at some point. But it's a whole new program specifically designed to support community groups that want to go solar. So community solar is a lot of things to a lot of people. There are larger projects often out in more rural parts of the state, that pass on great savings to individual subscribers. So you as a energy customer, if you're in ComEd and Ameren territory, if you want to go community solar instead of putting it on your roof, or if you can't put it on your roof, you can reach out and get a subscription. You save a bunch of money. It's a great relationship. I would highly recommend finding a community solar subscription if you haven't yet. But while those projects provide savings to customers and are a win-win for the state in pursuit of clean energy, they aren't quite as community-based as a lot of advocates, including a bunch of folks in the Clean Jobs Coalition, would have liked. And that's why this new community-owned community solar subprogram was created, to really try to incentivize projects that are located in the community and where the subscriptions are maybe closer to that project. And so to kind of put a finer point on this, although it's not necessarily representative of all the different projects that we might see in this category, you could picture a community center or a house of worship that has solar on the roof or on the property. And some of the solar savings go to that community center or that house of worship. And the rest of the subscriptions and the rest of the solar savings go to the individual parishioners or members of that community. And they might be investors in the project as well. But to figure all of that out, it's sometimes complex. And so this is grant funding to help those communities determine if they can pursue a community-owned community solar project. So it's for technical assistance, it's for some pre-development costs, it's to help them navigate how to actually make this work.
John, before you go on to the next slide,
Yeah.
We actually had a question in the chat about the slide you just did. Kai asked, what can EECs do now, if anything, to prepare for the Justice and Environmental Justice Grant Program?
It's a great question. And thanks, Paloma, for flagging that. The short answer is, I'm not sure. We're still waiting to hear from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity about how they're going to structure this or what some of their parameters will be. I didn't want to dive into this level of detail, but the most important thing would probably be to take a look at the legislative language and figure out what some of those criteria are and how some of those criteria, to try to brainstorm how some of those criteria might be interpreted, both for what an equity eligible contractor is and how an entity becomes certified as an equity eligible contractor, and how to be competitive for these grant applications. There is some fairly prescriptive language in CEJA that, for example, says that the grant applications can't be onerous or too long. I think it might even limit it to a certain number of pages, 4 or 5 pages. But there's still a lot of information that CEJA requires DCEO to collect through those applications. So that would be my first stop, is to just review the maybe 10 pages or so of legislative language that are in the bill. And I know that's, legislative language is not anybody's bedside reading, but that is probably the best North Star that we have at the moment to figure out how DCEO will take this and run with it. Soon, we hope to see DCEO start to convene some workshops or some stakeholder engagement sessions. And that is where it'll be especially crucial to not just receive information from DCEO about how they're going to interpret this, but to provide information and perspective about what is the right and most equitable and most effective way to interpret this. So I will certainly be ringing the alarm bell if we start to see DCEO convene those sessions. And otherwise, we're a bit in a holding pattern to figure out how DCEO is going to take the next few steps. No, that's not especially helpful, but that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Here we are, 4 of 4, the Equitable Energy Upgrade Program. This is in the tail end of the bill, and it lives in a whole different piece of the landscape. So this program will be run by the two large utilities in Illinois, Ameren and ComEd, but will be designed and structured by the Illinois Commerce Commission, which is the state entity that regulates the utilities and helps create the rules by which they operate. And I'll go in, this is going to have a little bit more details than the last two. So this is what I had hinted at earlier. It is an on-bill financing program that has robust consumer protections. And so on-bill financing is this broad category of programs, but it's all kind of designed to describe a scenario where you are not receiving a second loan or a second bill for some sort of energy upgrade. Instead, you are just paying for that energy upgrade on your electric bill. And the catch with Equitable Energy Upgrade Program, as designed in CEJA and as advocated for by the Clean Jobs Coalition, is that your bill cannot go up. It can only decrease because you are required to get a certain percentage of the savings from that energy upgrade. So there's guaranteed savings, right? The bill payments must be less than the energy savings. We believe it will primarily be for energy efficiency, like picture, blown-in insulation or new windows or a new furnace. But there are some ways that it could apply to rooftop solar, which would be really exciting if that's possible. Each utility, Ameren and ComEd, is required to offer 20 million of financing in year one. And then I believe that bumps up to 40 million per year in year two. And then from then on, it's sort of uncapped and is designed to be responsive to demand. So if more customers express interest and want to make their home warmer or safer or more comfortable or more affordable, then the utilities have to find new capital to make this work. So I've touched on some of this, but it's for the two big utilities, right? Ameren and ComEd. There's the funding amount written down. And here's kind of the crux, right? The annual charges can't exceed 80% of estimated annual savings. So if you were to just receive a free furnace, a new furnace that replaced an old energy inefficient furnace, you might save, $40 a month over the course of a year on average. These are all made up numbers. I'm not an energy efficiency expert. If you receive that for free, that would be $40 of saving, and free is better than financed, which I'll touch on in just a second. If you don't have the option to get it for free, you could finance it through this type of equitable energy upgrade program. And of the $40 savings per month, you might get $10 of savings per month. And the rest of it might go to pay off that furnace until you own it completely. And so the terms are locked in, and it'll be up to the Illinois Commerce Commission to figure out how to set all these terms. But the idea is that it can only save a customer money, and it is a pathway to true ownership of an asset, rather than just kind of like a lease or some sort of financing that wouldn't result in ownership. Importantly, it's not a loan. It can't result in any new debt or liens for the participant, whether they're a renter or an owner. It is not tied to that customer at all. It's actually tied to the utility meter. So if something goes wrong, or if the finances of the person doesn't work out, there is not some new debt that would chase them from residence to residence, unlike taking out a personal loan or some sort of other financing option. It does include some language that prioritizes customers that are sort of lower or middle income, those that are 150% or less of area median income. It also has language, importantly, that ensures that somebody who is informing a customer about options through the Equitable Energy Upgrade Program, that representative of the program is required to tell the customer if they can get a free upgrade. Again, free is always better than financed, and lower income customers, those that are 80% or less of area median income, they often have the option of pursuing some sort of free energy efficiency upgrade. And that's thanks to the tireless advocacy of folks on this call and beyond who have required that the utilities offer really robust low-income energy efficiency programs. So free is better than financed, but there's that missing middle of folks that can't get a free upgrade and might not be interested or might not have access to a loan to do a financed upgrade. And I believe that this program is perfectly tailored for that missing middle. And here it is. Here's the missing middle. So on one side, you have funding, which is the best route if somebody who's income qualified can tap into like a direct install program or some sort of free option. On the other side, you have consumer financing, which for people who have the wealth and the credit score, it's a good option, right? There are loans available that are worthwhile and do pencil out, where you're saving money, you're saving energy, your home is more comfortable, and you're helping the climate. You're doing your part for the climate crisis. So these are both great options, but they're not available to everybody. And as I mentioned in that very first slide, the gap between what we have been doing and what we need to do to reduce energy demand, to go sort of off fossil fuels is so much higher than what we have available. So that's where this type of like on-bill financing comes in, to serve that missing middle and to create new pathways for renters in addition to homeowners. Here's sort of the flow of how this type of program will work. Ultimately, it'll be up to the Illinois Commerce Commission to design this, but a customer might schedule the free assessment. They would get the assessment. They would get certain things directly installed for free if they are income qualified. But maybe they would also have some additional work that they want to finance, or maybe they're not qualified, and so they want to explore on-bill financing. So the contractor would install those deeper weatherization upgrades, and ultimately the customer wins by a lower bill and increased comfort. This same workflow could add solar to it, again, if the Illinois Commerce Commission determines that it is the right fit. So there's no loans or liens, there's no out-of-pocket costs except for possibly to allow things like renewable energy credit payments and incentives to help pay down that on-bill financing. There's no credit or income check, so you don't need a credit history or a good credit score. And no matter what, you save more than you pay. So I'm going to wrap up there and see if there are any questions about these 4 really exciting inclusive financing opportunities in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Thank you all for joining and for listening. All right, I see a question from Richard. So why did this get put in the ICC? They have no dealing with the public and are generally consumer hostile. So ultimately, the ICC is in charge of regulating utilities, and this is a program that will be offered by those large regulated utilities. And so the good news is that the language is fairly explicit about the parameters of this program and what is included and what's excluded. And it does involve a series of workshops that anybody can join to help weigh in and ensure that this is implemented the right way. So I think there will be a good opportunity to weigh in. And Richard, I encourage you to keep your eyes peeled for those workshops. I believe they'll start in mid-June, although we're still waiting for some additional information from the ICC. Blake, we've got a question here. There doesn't seem to be any financing mechanism for simply putting up solar panels on your house. Great question. As somebody who works for Vote Solar, this is something I think about a lot. So as like a quick crash course, which is probably a review for a lot of folks, there are a few different ways to go solar and to have it financed. So, right, there's one option where you just pay for it with cash, and you have like a war chest set aside, and solar systems can be anywhere from like $15,000 to $30,000 for a home. And if you have that money down, that's the best wealth building opportunity. You would then get that renewable energy credit incentive. If you have the tax appetite, you'd be able to claim that federal tax credit. A lot of people don't have that type of money set aside. And so then the question becomes, how do we finance this? One option is a lease, where a company would own the system and put it on your roof, and you get savings each month from the solar energy. So you're not saving quite as much if you had bought it outright, but you're also not paying that much money out of pocket for the purchase. So a lease is one option that we see a lot, where customers don't put any money down and they immediately start saving 20% on their energy bills. Another option is a power purchase agreement, where for most intents and purposes, it's similar to a lease, but instead of a fixed monthly payment, you are paying for the energy that the solar system creates. But then to get more to the point, and because I see some other questions coming in, the private sector has started to offer solar loans, where somebody who has a good enough credit score, again, could tap into a loan that is tailored for solar. So for example, maybe the loan is for the full solar amount up front, but then within a year, right, you just got a federal tax credit, or you just got a REC payment, and it allows you to pay down those loans and like re-amortize your interest, right? Sort of reset the clock on your interest when you put in that big chunk of change from the feds via the tax credit, or from the state via the renewable energy credits. So those loans exist, and they're great, and I recommend them for people who are looking to explore solar. But what we hope this will do is unlock new opportunities, primarily through the Equitable Energy Upgrade Program, and through the Jobs and Justice Fund. So the Jobs and Justice Fund could essentially be one of those loan providers, or they could provide their own lease, where they are now the owner of the system. They are the ones claiming the tax credit. They are the ones getting the renewable energy credit, and they are just passing on substantial solar savings to the customers. And in the case of the Jobs and Justice Fund, because it's so mission driven, to primarily low and moderate income or disadvantaged customers. The Equitable Energy Upgrade Program might work for solar, because it allows you to sort of do that same thing I described for the private loans of re-amortizing the debt. We believe, and we'll be advocating at the Illinois Commerce Commission, that a customer should be able to go solar and pay it off on their electric bill with those mandatory savings, and that it should all work out. There are some like wonkier questions that I won't dig into around who actually owns the solar system for a utility financed on-bill financing program. I also won't dig too deep into the weeds for the federal tax credit and how that would get claimed. But that's my entirely too long deep dive into solar financing. Something I think about a lot, so feel free to reach out if you want to dig a little deeper. Candace, I plan on making the slides available through IEC, so I don't know what they'll be able to do to distribute them. But I think the recording will also be available.
Yep, we will be sending around both of those in an email to all the registrants following this. So Candace, keep an eye out for both those in your inbox.
Thanks, Paloma.
Thank you.
Jean, I've got a good question here around, so ultimately, like, there are a lot of ways for community infrastructure or for houses of worship in particular to go solar. And the real question just becomes, do they do a behind the meter installation, right, where the project is just sized to offset the amount of energy that that church or that community center is using, plus daycare, plus rec center? Or do they oversize the project so that it generates a lot more than what is consumed at that location? In which case, it would probably make more sense to do a community solar project. and to like provide those excess savings, those excess credits to other subscribers who are outside of that property, but part of that community. So we'll see exactly what shape that takes. It'll be interesting to see how they interpret this when they are finalizing the rules for community-owned community solar. But there are a lot of different options for that type of community infrastructure. One is like what we call the large DG program, right? The large distributed generation program, which is part of the state REC incentive initiative. Another is the Solar for All program. So for communities that are considered like critical need providers or critical service providers, those kind of not-for-profit entities can go solar and save even more because they are that critical service provider. So I'd take a look at the Solar for All program if you get a chance. And Candace asked about more information on community solar. There are a couple links that I could dig up that maybe could be a good fit for follow-up. But there is some information from the Illinois Power Agency. Also, the Citizens Utility Board has a really helpful portal that goes over the different types of community solar and talks about the actual companies that are offering community solar subscriptions. So those would be my recommendations, but I won't be not good enough at multitasking to dig them up just yet.
John, if you could send those to me, then I can make sure that all the registrants also receive those in a follow-up email.
That sounds great. And please remind me if I forget there. So great question, Michelle, around what a green bank is or does. It's kind of an umbrella term and is a little out of style because there is some sensitivity when something is called the bank. There's federal regulations that guide what a bank can and cannot do. And some of those regulations actually make it difficult to provide the type of investments needed to pursue parity, to eliminate disparities. And so a green bank is really any financing entity, whether it is a formal bank, whether it's a nonprofit fund, whether it's a state-based financing entity that pursues ways of unlocking new capital for clean energy projects. I know that's really vague, but it's purposely so. It's kind of an umbrella term. What we see most often is green banks. They do directly finance projects. Like they might provide the capital needed for a big community solar project to go online. More often than not, they are there to support and embolden private capital. So they might say, hey, we have $50 million from the state. We would like to use this to help secure private capital from other banks that are lacking the courage or the innovation or the wherewithal to pursue what they view as a riskier investment. And so in doing so, you use a little bit of state money to unlock a whole bunch of private money. And that kind of mechanism is called the loan loss reserve. And I know I'm not explaining it to the detail needed, but that is what a green bank does, is they take, public or philanthropic capital and they use it to leverage additional capital from other sources to unlock clean energy and climate solutions. And then our interpretation of it, our specific green banks, especially the Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund, focus not just on climate and clean energy solutions, but on equitable and inclusive climate and clean energy solutions, and kind of are laser focused on that. A clarifying question. Those are the 4 funding options. And I'm sure I've missed a couple here and there. There's additional capital available through some of the workforce and contractor development programs, but those are the 4 that I covered. The Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund, which is that nonprofit green bank. The Climate Bank, which is a state-based Green Bank in the Illinois Finance Authority, the Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program, which is with DCEO, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and is just grants. That's just money, sort of forgivable money for contractors and community-owned community solar. And then fourth is the Equitable Energy Upgrade Program, that sort of on-bill financing initiative that is run through the utilities, but designed by the Illinois Commerce Commission. Thanks for inviting that summary. I know it's a lot. I did have another question sent to me about whether or not some of these programs will be available to muni or co-op customers. And for reference, for people who aren't aware of the distinction, most Illinoisans are covered by one of the two large investor-owned utilities. And so that's Ameren and ComEd, but there are a ton of other utilities in the state, whether it's rural electric cooperatives or municipal utilities. And they are typically out in smaller towns and in rural areas, but not always. And they often get left out of this conversation through one way or another. And so I'm glad this question was raised. Some of the programs will be available. The Jobs and Justice Fund, there's nothing restricting that to the investor-owned utilities. Same with the Climate Bank, right? That funding is coming from the state for the state and for all customers. The Jobs and Environmental Justice Grant Program, which is run by DCEO, will be available to contractors everywhere, no matter what utility they serve in. The Equitable Energy Upgrade Program is the only one that is just for the two large investor-owned utilities. So that on-bill financing initiative that I just described is focused on Ameren and ComEd and for those customers. That said, the Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund, the not-for-profit Green Bank, could, and I believe should, create some financing products that help munis and co-ops, those municipal utilities and those rural electric cooperatives, explore this type of on-bill financing. And frankly, munis and co-ops have led the charge for this type of inclusive financing mechanism. They are the original pilots, they're the original case studies, and they have every reason to do this because they're not-for-profit entities. Munis and co-ops aren't run by the shareholders, they're there to serve the customers in an ideal world. And so they should be doing this already. They get a lot of cheap money from the federal government, and they have every reason to just jump on this and immediately start offering it. But I remember in the Jobs and Justice Fund language, there is reference to the aspiration of helping those municipal and co-op utilities create this type of on-bill financing mechanism. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, we are at about 10 minutes to the hour, so I'll throw out another final call for any other questions if folks want to throw those into the chat or just raise your hand. And if we don't have any, I'll also throw John's email into the chat again in case folks think of any others. But yeah, with that, I'm going to go ahead and just thank everybody for tuning in and hopping on this call. Again, if you think of any questions right now, feel free to throw them in. But yeah, thank you for joining us. I'm going to throw in oh, I see.
Sorry,
John.
One last pitch that I wanted to weave in here.
Awesome.
So within the Clean Jobs Coalition, there is an inclusive financing committee that focuses on these 4 issues. We're not experts necessarily, we're advocates that are trying to ensure these are implemented as well and as equitably as possible. So if any of you are interested in joining that conversation, there's typically about a dozen to 15 of us that circle around a virtual table once a week and dive into these details and try to advocate for that implementation. So probably the easiest way to plug in is just shoot me an email and I'll add you to that listserv and put you on a calendar invite. So thanks for letting me sneak in that last plug, Paloma.
Of course, that sounds awesome. Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining this Lunch and Learn and giving us an hour of your time. Definitely keep an eye on your inboxes. Next month, we are going to have a whole bunch of really great ones in store, including 2 more CEJA Lunch and Learns, and then some other Lunch and Learns, one on the Chicago Department of Environment, and some other great ones for Earth Month, since that is coming up. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. If you'd like to support IEC's work, I dropped a link into the chat to become a member. And yeah, with that, I'll give everybody the rest of their hour back. And thank you all so much for joining us. And thanks, John, for presenting.
Thanks, Paloma. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.